I'm Daniel. I've always been an adventurer, but there's one place I will never return to. The abandoned campsite in the middle of the forest. What happened to me and my friends there is something I can never forget. It started as a typical camping trip with a few friends, Tom, Lisa, and Jake. We decided to camp at a spot I found online, a remote site hidden deep in the woods. The reviews were mixed, but I figured we could handle it. What could go wrong? The campsite was secluded, tucked between tall trees, far away from any main roads or hiking trails. It had an eerie feel as soon as we arrived, but we set up camp anyway. The air was heavy, and the silence was unsettling, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. As night fell, we built a fire and sat around it, telling stories and laughing. But something felt off. I kept hearing faint noises in the distance like footsteps, but too rhythmic to be animals. The others didn't hear it, or at least didn't acknowledge it, so I pushed the feeling aside. Around midnight, we decided to take a walk through the woods. We had heard rumors of strange happenings at this campsite, but we didn't take them seriously. As we ventured deeper into the trees, we found something strange, an old, abandoned cabin. It was run down, with broken windows and a rotting porch. The air around it felt colder, and the silence grew thicker. "What do you think?" Tom asked, looking at the cabin with curiosity. "I don't know," I said, uneasy. "It doesn't look safe." But Lisa, always the daring one, insisted we check it out. Reluctantly, we followed her inside. The cabin smelled of mold and decay, the floor creaking under our feet as we explored. There were remnants of old furniture, dusty chairs, overturned tables, and rotting shelves. But there was something else too. On one of the walls, strange symbols were carved into the wood, patterns that didn't look human. Suddenly, we heard a noise outside, a loud crash, like something heavy falling to the ground. We froze, our hearts racing. We quickly ran out of the cabin, but when we stepped back into the clearing, everything had changed. The fire we'd left burning at our campsite was now completely out. Our tents were torn open, their contents scattered across the ground. It looked like someone or something had been through them. Panic set in as we tried to gather our belongings and leave, but the path was gone. The trees seemed to have shifted, blocking our way. Then, we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and closing in on us. We turned around, but there was nothing there. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. We ran, stumbling through the woods, not knowing where we were going or how to escape. We didn't stop until we reached the car. As we drove away, I glanced back toward the woods, and for just a moment, I thought I saw someone standing in the trees, watching us leave. We never spoke of that night again. The campsite is still there, but no one I know is brave enough to go back. Some places are better left untouched, and some memories are better left forgotten. My name is Kyle, and I'll never forget the summer camping trip that turned into a nightmare. I've always been an outdoorsy person, so when my friends and I decided to head up to a secluded forest for the weekend, I was excited. Little did I know that decision would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a small group, just me, Sarah, Lucas, and Chris. We rented a cabin near the edge of a dense forest. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, and we spent the first day hiking and exploring the area. The forest felt peaceful, untouched by the world. The trees were tall and ancient, and the air was fresh, but there was something unnerving about it. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The usual sounds of birds and animals seemed absent, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up by the evening. We'd set up a campfire near the cabin. As we sat around it, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, we noticed something strange in the distance, a large tree that stood apart from the others. It was massive, with a hollow trunk big enough for a person to fit inside. The tree was at the edge of the forest, just outside our campfire's reach, and its presence felt ... wrong. "Let's go check it out," Lucas suggested, his curiosity piqued. "Are you sure? It looks weird." Sarah hesitated. "Yeah, come on, it's just a tree. What's the worst that could happen?" Chris added, already standing up. Reluctantly, we all agreed to check it out. We grabbed our flashlights and made our way into the woods toward the tree. The closer we got, the more I could feel something wasn't right. The air grew colder, the moonlight barely penetrating the thick canopy above us. As we reached the tree, we all stopped, staring at its hollow trunk. It was enormous, the inside dark and impenetrable. "Anyone want to go inside?" Lucas joked, trying to break the tension. "Not a chance," I replied, but as I said it, I felt drawn to it. The tree seemed to pulse with an odd energy, and my eyes kept going back to its hollow center. Suddenly, Chris moved toward the tree. "I'll do it." "Chris, don't," Sarah shouted, but it was too late. He ducked inside, disappearing into the darkness of the tree's hollow. We waited for a few moments, but Chris didn't come back out. "Chris," I called, but my voice sounded small and weak in the vast silence of the forest. "Chris, come on." "This isn't funny," Lucas added, but there was a noticeable edge of worry in his voice. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The silence was unnerving. Just as I was about to move toward the tree, we heard a rustling noise behind us. We spun around, but there was nothing there. Then we heard its soft footsteps. Footsteps that sounded like they were moving closer to us, though no one was in sight. The hairs on my neck stood up as the footsteps grew louder and closer. We all backed away from the tree, heartbeats racing. Out of the darkness, Chris finally appeared. He was covered in dirt and leaves, his clothes torn. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Chris," Sarah exclaimed, rushing to him. "Where have you been?" We were getting worried. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice sounded different, low and raspy. "You shouldn't have come here," he muttered. "What do you mean?" "We were looking for you," I said, confused and worried. Chris turned his head toward the tree. His eyes locked on it with an expression of pure terror. "It spoke to me. It called my name." "Chris, are you okay?" Lucas asked, his voice shaky. "I heard it. The tree. It wanted me to stay. It wanted me to become part of it." We all stared at him, unsure of how to respond. But before we could say anything else, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The tree's hollow seemed to pulse, as if it was alive, its gnarled roots twisting and shifting beneath the earth. The air around us grew thick with an oppressive energy, and I could feel the ground vibrating under my feet. Without a word, we turned and bolted back to the cabin. The forest around us seemed to come alive, the branches creaking and groaning, as if reaching out to grab us. As we ran, I looked over my shoulder, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw figures, shadowy shapes, standing beneath the tree. Watching us, we made it back to the cabin, panting and terrified. Chris locked the door behind us and collapsed to the floor, still muttering about the tree. "Is it gone?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. We all sat in silence, too scared to speak. The rest of the night was a blur of nervous glances and quiet whispers. We didn't sleep, and when morning came, we packed up and left without saying a word to anyone. We never spoke of that tree again, but I can still hear Chris's voice in my head. It wanted me to stay. I'll never go near that forest again, and I'll never forget the hollow tree that called to us, waiting for the next victim. I'm Sarah. I had always heard the stories about Pine Hollow, the haunted woods near our campgrounds, but I thought they were just stories. That is, until the trip I'll never forget. It was supposed to be a simple weekend camping with friends, but something about Pine Hollow felt different from the start. The moment we set up our tents, a strange stillness settled over the forest. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, and the air was thick, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We spent the day hiking, laughing, and taking photos. But as the sun began to set, something in the woods changed. A whispering sound drifted through the air. I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized no wind was blowing. The whispering grew louder, as if the forest itself was speaking, murmuring names I couldn't understand. "Did you hear that?" I asked my friends. Ryan, the brave one of the group, laughed it off. "It's just the wind. You're paranoid." But as the night wore on, the whispers grew clearer. They were calling to us, beckoning us into the trees. The fire flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward us. "We should go to bed," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't feel right about this place." But my friends, eager to brush off the fear, insisted we stay. So, we sat around the fire, trying to ignore the voices, but the whispers kept growing. I couldn't understand the words, but they felt wrong. Then, at the edge of the clearing, I saw it movement in the shadows. A figure, tall and thin, just beyond the trees. It stood still for a moment before slowly stepping forward, as if it were waiting for us to notice. Double quotes, "Guys, There's something out there," I said, my heart racing. Ryan stood up, trying to prove he wasn't scared. "It's probably an animal. Relax, Sarah." But the figure didn't move like an animal. It moved with purpose, too deliberate. It stepped closer, its shape becoming more defined in the firelight. Its pale skin glowed faintly, and I saw its eyes dark and hollow, staring straight at us. That's when we all heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy steps coming from behind us. We turned, but no one was there, just the trees, watching us. "Let's go," I whispered urgently. "Now." We grabbed our stuff and hurried to the trail, but as we walked, the whispers followed. It felt like they were all around us, growing louder and more insistent. Every step we took, the forest seemed to close in tighter, the trees pressing closer, their branches reaching out like arms. We didn't stop running until we found the edge of the forest. The whispers faded, but the feeling of being followed didn't leave. The figure, whatever it was, had disappeared into the trees, but I knew it was still watching us. When we finally made it back to the car, we didn't speak much. The silence between us was heavy, each of us feeling the weight of what we had experienced. None of us said it out loud, but we all knew we had narrowly escaped something that had been waiting for us in those woods. To this day, I still hear the whispers when I close my eyes at night. I don't know what it was out there in Pine Hollow, but I'll never return to find out. Some stories are better left untold. My name is James. I used to love camping, but after the last trip, I'm never going back. I went with two friends, Emily and Ryan, to a remote campsite deep in the woods. It was meant to be a peaceful getaway, but what we experienced changed everything. The first night was uneventful, or so I thought. As we sat around the fire, I noticed something strange, unmoving figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. I pointed it out to Emily and Ryan, but by the time they looked, it was gone. They brushed it off as nothing. The next day, we hiked deeper into the forest. We followed a narrow path, but the trees seemed to close in on us. The air grew thick, and we felt trapped. I kept looking at the map, but it didn't help. Many of the trails weren't even there anymore. Still, Emily and Ryan weren't worried. I tried to ignore my growing unease. As the hours passed, we found ourselves lost. The sun began to set, and the forest took on a darker, more oppressive atmosphere. That's when we heard the hum. Low and distant at first, then it grew louder, unnatural. We stopped, staring into the trees. "What's that sound?" Ryan whispered. I didn't know, but I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. The woods seemed to be closing in on us, the branches reaching out like hands. We started running, but the path was gone. We were completely disoriented, the trees twisting into strange shapes. We finally saw a light in the distance, and I thought it was our camp. But when we arrived, everything was wrong. The tents were torn, the fire was out, and our gear was scattered, as if something had been through it. Panic set in. Then we heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the trees. We turned, and there it was again. The same figure, standing still, watching us from the edge of the woods. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We ran, not stopping until we reached the car. The figure didn't follow, but the feeling of being watched never left. I don't know what it was, but I'll never return to those woods. Whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. My name is Mark, and I've never been one to believe in superstitions. But after what happened on that camping trip, I can't explain what I saw, and I don't think I ever will. It started out as a typical trip. My friends, Tom, Julia, and Matt, and I had been planning a weekend getaway for months. We chose a remote spot deep in the woods, far from any roads or civilization, a place where no one would bother us, just pure silence and the beauty of nature. The first day was perfect, clear skies, a light breeze, and the comforting sounds of birds and rustling leaves. We set up our tents and started a fire, sharing laughs and stories into the night. It was everything I had hoped for. But as night fell, something felt off. At first, it was nothing more than an odd feeling, like we were being watched. Julia mentioned it first, but we all laughed it off. After all, it's just the woods, nothing to be afraid of. But as the fire burned low, we saw something in the distance, a flickering light. It was far away, moving between the trees, almost like a lantern. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. Is someone out there? Tom asked, his voice curious. I don't know, I said, standing up to get a better look. It looks like a lantern. We all stood there, staring at the faint glow. It didn't seem like it was moving on its own, it was being carried by someone. But we couldn't see the person, just the light. It moved further into the woods, disappearing behind a thick cluster of trees. Maybe someone else is camping nearby, Julia suggested, but her voice didn't sound as confident as it usually did. Let's just go to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept thinking about the light, the way it had flickered out of view. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing things, twigs breaking, soft rustling sounds from the trees. Every time I thought I saw something outside my tent, I'd freeze, hoping it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, the soft, rhythmic sound of footsteps. Not animal footsteps, but the slow, deliberate kind that a human makes. My heart raced as I lay perfectly still in my tent, praying it would go away. Then, I heard a voice, low and eerie, like it was whispering in the wind. Get out. I bolted upright, my chest tight with panic. What the hell was that? I muttered to myself. I tried to wake Tom and Matt, but neither of them responded. They were in deep sleep, completely unaware of what was happening around them. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, my body trembling. The air was thick and cold, and the forest was unusually quiet. The wind had died, and even the usual nighttime sounds were gone. There was only the faint rustling of leaves beneath my feet as I stepped away from the camp. And then, I saw the lantern again. It was floating, suspended in midair, far from the camp, moving slowly through the trees. I couldn't see who was carrying it, but I could feel its presence watching me. I followed the lantern, my steps hesitant but drawn to it. It led me deeper into the woods, further from the camp. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. I was losing my sense of direction, but the light kept moving ahead, like it was guiding me. Suddenly, the light stopped, hovering in front of an ancient-looking tree. The trunk was gnarled and twisted, as though it had been there for centuries. The lantern swayed in the air, casting an eerie glow on the tree's bark. And there, etched into the wood, was a symbol, a strange, twisted pattern that I couldn't recognize. I reached out to touch it, my fingers trembling. As soon as my hand made contact with the tree, the lantern dropped to the ground with a loud thud. The light flickered out, plunging me into darkness. Then, the whispering voice returned. "You shouldn't have come." I froze in terror, as the air around me seemed to shift. The temperature dropped even further, and I felt a presence moving behind me. My breath caught in my throat, and I spun around to face the darkness. But there was no one there. Just the silent, oppressive weight of the forest around me. I ran. I didn't stop to look back. I just ran, stumbling through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the camp, I found Tom and Matt still asleep, completely unaware of the terror I had just experienced. We packed up and left early the next morning. I didn't tell them what happened. I couldn't. I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night. Whether it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else, I don't care. I never went camping again, and I never want to. My name is Claire, and I never thought I would be the one to experience something so terrifying. I used to think that ghost stories were just that, stories. That was before I went on the camping trip that changed my life. That it was supposed to be a fun, relaxing weekend. My friends, Emily, Ryan, and Jack, and I decided to head up to the remote mountainside for a break from our busy lives. We found a secluded camping site far from any crowds, a place that seemed perfect for some peace and quiet. The first evening was peaceful, with nothing but the sounds of the wind in the trees. We built a fire and shared stories late into the night. But around midnight, Emily mentioned that she felt like someone was watching us. We all laughed it off, thinking it was just her imagination. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint whispers outside the tent. It sounded like voices, but they were too soft to make out. I told myself it was the wind, or perhaps an animal in the woods, but the whispers continued, growing louder and more distinct. I finally got up, trying to ignore the rising panic in my chest. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cold night air, the moonlight casting eerie shadows over the camp. There was nothing around us, no one in sight. But the whispers continued, as if they were coming from deep within the forest. I called out, "Hello," but the only response was the rustling of leaves. I chalked it up to nerves and went back to bed, trying to convince myself that I was just hearing things. The next day, everything seemed normal, but as the sun set, I started to feel the same uneasy tension from the previous night. As we sat around the campfire, I noticed that Ryan and Jack kept looking nervously into the woods, as though they were hearing something too, but no one said anything. We just pretended everything was fine. That night, the whispers returned. This time, they were louder, more insistent. I could hear words now, though they were still impossible to understand. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the voices weren't just the wind, they were coming from the forest, surrounding us. In a panic, I woke Emily, but she couldn't hear anything. Ryan and Jack, still asleep, didn't seem to notice the growing unease. I stepped out of the tent again, trying to find the source of the voices. The cold night air was thick with a strange energy, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wandered toward the woods, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, until they were a maddening chorus in my ears. I tried to ignore the fear creeping up on me, but it was impossible. Every step I took seemed to pull me deeper into the forest, where the shadows stretched, unnaturally long and twisted. Suddenly, I saw something, a figure standing in the distance, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. It was tall and thin, its features indistinct, but I could feel its presence, like it was staring right at me. The whispers stopped. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure moved toward me, its limbs jerking unnaturally, like it was struggling to break free of something. It was coming, closer, faster than I could move, and the fear took over. I ran back to the camp, heart pounding in my chest, not daring to look behind me. When I reached the tent, I woke Ryan and Jack. I was shaking, unable to speak at first, but when I finally managed to tell them what I saw, they didn't believe me. They thought I was dreaming or imagining things. We packed up and left the next morning, but the whispers didn't stop. As we hiked back down the trail, I could still hear them, faint but unmistakable. They followed us, like an invisible force. I never went camping again. Every time I close my eyes, I still hear the whispers in the dark. They are still out there, waiting, and I can't shake the feeling that they are calling me back to the forest. My name is Sam, and I thought I had seen everything after years of camping in the woods. But the trip to Bear Hollow changed that forever. It started with a simple plan, a weekend camping trip with my friends. There was me, Nick, Sarah, and Jonah. We had been camping together for years, but Bear Hollow was a new spot. Remote, secluded, and untouched by the usual crowds. It seemed like the perfect place to get away from it all. We arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun dipping behind the trees as we set up camp. The woods felt different, thicker, quieter. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an unsettling stillness. We shrugged it off as part of the isolation, the kind of thing you expect in remote places. The first night was uneventful. We made a fire, told jokes, and laughed. But as we sat around the fire, Nick noticed something strange. A figure, tall and dark, standing at the edge of the trees. We all looked, but the moment we turned our heads, it was gone. "That's odd," Sarah said, but we brushed it off, thinking it was just a trick of the light or a shadow from the trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. That night, I woke up to a soft noise, a faint rustling, like something moving through the woods. At first, I assumed it was just the wind, but then I heard its footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching our camp. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked outside the tent. Nothing, but the sound didn't stop. It came closer and closer, as if circling our camp. "Who's out there?" I whispered, but no one answered. I woke Nick and Jonah, and we decided to investigate. We grabbed our gear and ventured out into the woods, the light from our flashlights cutting through the darkness. We moved quietly, careful not to make any noise. After a few minutes, we found nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone being there. Just the same eerie stillness that surrounded us, but I felt its presence. It was as if something was watching us, waiting for us to make the wrong move. We decided to head back to camp, but as we turned to leave, I saw it. A shadow, just outside the reach of our flashlights, moving between the trees. It was tall, humanoid, but it didn't move like a person. It was wrong. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, like it didn't belong in this world. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The others noticed, and we all stared in silence as the shadow moved deeper into the woods. "Let's go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Now, we didn't need any more convincing. We ran back to camp, packed our things, and decided to leave. As we walked back to the car, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us, just out of sight. We never saw the shadow again, but the woods were never the same after that. Every time I close my eyes, I see it, the long, twisted shape lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for me to return. My name is Jake, and if you had asked me about ghosts a week ago, I would have laughed and said they were nothing but stories for kids. But after what I experienced, I can't be so sure anymore. It all started when a group of Usme, my brother, Zach, and our two friends, Olivia and Mason decided to spend the weekend camping in the mountains. We found a remote area on a map, far from any marked trails, where we could truly escape. The plan was simple: hike in, set up camp, enjoy the fresh air, and leave our phones behind. It seemed like the perfect weekend getaway. The hike took longer than expected. We arrived at dusk, the sun dipping below the horizon as we reached a clearing in the woods. There, hidden between a cluster of trees, was an old cabin. It looked abandoned, but the structure itself seemed sturdy enough to offer shelter from the coming night. We weren't too picky. We had planned on camping, but the sight of the cabin was too tempting to ignore. "We'll take it," Zach said, grinning. "We could use a roof over our heads." The four of us piled inside, careful not to disturb the dust and debris. The cabin felt cold, almost too cold for the season. There were strange symbols etched into the walls, which we chalked up too old. Carvings made by previous owners, or even kids messing around. Still, there was an odd energy to the place. Something in the air felt wrong, like the cabin had been untouched for a reason. We started a fire in the fireplace, but it did little to warm the place. As we ate, the atmosphere grew heavier, like the cabin itself was watching us. It was as though we were being observed, but when we looked around, we saw nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until the second night that things started to go wrong. As we were sitting around the fire, telling stories, Olivia suddenly went pale. "I think I hear something," she whispered, her voice trembling. We all stopped talking and listened. At first, I heard nothing, but then, faintly, there was a sound, a tapping, like something knocking on the walls. We dismissed it as the wind or an animal, but Olivia wasn't convinced. "Is anyone else hearing that?" she asked, her eyes wide. Mason and Zach laughed it off, but I could tell Olivia wasn't joking. I stood up and walked to one of the cabin's windows. The tapping stopped the moment I turned to look, and a shiver ran down my spine. It felt as though something or someone was out there. We went to bed soon after, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air in the cabin felt even colder than before, and every creak of the wooden floorboards sounded louder in the silence. Around midnight, I woke to a strange sound. It wasn't the tapping this time. It was a whisper, soft at first, but growing louder. "Help, ... me, ... I sat up, my heart pounding. I thought I heard the voice coming from somewhere deep within the cabin. It wasn't one of my friends. It sounded like someone who had been trapped here for years. I wasn't sure if I imagined it, or if I was just hearing things. But then, the whisper came again. "Help, ... me, ... I stood up and moved cautiously toward the source of the sound, which seemed to be coming from the back room of the cabin. I knew I shouldn't go in there alone, but something compelled me to. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly pushed open the door. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was empty, save for a pile of old furniture covered in dust. But on the wall, scratched into the wood, were the same symbols I had seen earlier. They were etched deep into the wood, as if someone had tried to carve them with their bare hands. Beneath them was a message, barely visible. "The curse will never let you leave." Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me, a low growl, like something was moving just beyond the doorway. I spun around, my flashlight beam catching something in the corner of the room. A shadow, tall, thin, and moving in unnatural ways. Before I could react, the shadow lunged toward me, but I managed to slam the door shut just in time. I was trembling, my heart racing in my chest. I ran back to the others, but by the time I reached the main room, they were all awake, their faces pale. "What happened?" Zach asked, his voice shaking. "There's something in there," I said, barely able to speak. "It's not just a cabin, it's cursed." We didn't wait for sunrise. We packed our things in a panic, desperate to leave. But as we opened the door to leave, I caught a glimpse of something at the edge of the clearing, something that wasn't there before. It was a figure, pale and distorted, its face a twisted mask of agony. We ran, not looking back, until we reached the trail. We didn't stop until we were safely back at the car. We haven't spoken much about the cabin since, but I know one thing for sure: there was something in those woods, something that didn't want us to leave. My name is Kyle Daniels, and I've never been a fan of camping, but when my friends insisted, I agreed to join them for a weekend in the woods. The idea was to escape the hustle of city life, pitch tents, and enjoy nature. We set out to Camp Ashwood, a well-known spot for outdoor enthusiasts. But what we didn't know was that Ashwood wasn't just famous for its scenic views. We arrived at dusk, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. The air was crisp, but there was a strange stillness, like the forest itself was holding its breath. My friends, Mark, Lisa, and Ben, were excited, setting up camp with laughter and banter. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was ... off. It wasn't until the campfire was lit that I heard it. A low, almost imperceptible rustling in the woods, just beyond the campsite. I thought it was just a raccoon or deer, but it was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate, a steady movement through the underbrush that didn't match any animal's usual pattern. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, trying to hide the unease creeping into my voice. Lisa looked up from the fire. "What, a squirrel or something?" "No, it's not that," I said, standing up and scanning the trees. "It's something else." Mark laughed. "Kyle, man, you're always spooked. Relax, it's just the forest. You're not in the city anymore." But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I sat back down, trying to ignore the creeping anxiety in my chest. As the night deepened, the rustling grew louder, and then a shadow moved between the trees. It was fast and it wasn't any animal. It was humanoid, tall, and its form was just wrong. It darted between the trees, and for a moment, I swear I saw its eyes dark, hollow, and glowing faintly. My heart raced, and I stood up abruptly. "There's something out there," I said, my voice shaking. Ben stood up, trying to stay calm. "Kyle, calm down. It's probably just a trick of the light." But I wasn't convinced. Something wasn't right. The air felt thicker now, colder. The shadows seemed to grow longer, and the sounds of the forest had vanished. There was no chirping of crickets, no rustling of leaves, just an eerie silence. Then, without warning, a figure stepped out from the trees. It wasn't the same shadow I'd seen earlier. It was something much worse. It was tall, its skin pale as death, and its face was a twisted mask of agony, its eyes wide and lifeless. It didn't move like a person, but more like something that didn't belong in the world. Its limbs were too long, too spindly. It stood there, staring at us. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating. Mark grabbed a flashlight and shined it in the creature's direction, but it didn't flinch. Instead, it smiled a grotesque, inhuman grin that sent chills down my spine. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But as I turned to grab my things, the ground beneath my feet shook. A deep rumble echoed from the forest, followed by a deafening growl. The creature had moved closer, and I could hear it whispering words that made no sense, like a language from another world. "Run," Ben shouted. We bolted for the car, stumbling over rocks and roots, but the creature was faster. It was everywhere, its dark shape darting between the trees, always just out of sight, but never far behind. I could feel its breath on my neck, hear its whispers in my ears, urging me to stop. Finally, we reached the car, slamming the doors shut. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes locking onto ours through the windshield. It was silent now, but the air felt heavy, thick with an oppressive presence. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished back into the woods. We didn't speak as we drove away, the weight of what had happened hanging heavily in the air. We didn't go back to Camp Ashwood. None of us ever spoke of it again. But I can't forget the face of that thing, the hollow, tortured eyes, the smile. I'm not sure what we encountered that night, but one thing is certain. Whatever it was, it still watches us from the shadows. My name is Riley, and I never believed in ghosts until I went camping with my friends in the woods of Dread, a secluded spot deep in the mountains. The trees so thick that sunlight barely touches the ground. It seemed perfect, until it wasn't. The trip was planned for weeks. There were 5 of us: Lucas, Emma, Kyle, Ava, and me. None of us had been to this part of the woods, but we were excited. We arrived late on Friday, setting up camp by a creek as night began to fall. The air grew colder, and an eerie stillness blanketed the forest. The chirping of birds stopped, the leaves rustled no more. It was as if nature itself had gone silent. As we sat around the fire, a sudden chill set in. Kyle suggested we tell ghost stories. Emma, who had been quiet all evening, spoke up. "Have you guys heard about the whispers?" We exchanged confused glances. "What whispers?" I asked. "The ones people hear in the woods," she said. "They say if you listen long enough, you can hear voices. Sometimes they call your name. Sometimes they lure you in." I dismissed it. "That's just a story, Emma. It's probably just the wind," but she didn't seem convinced. "I've heard them before, on another trip. It sounded like someone was right next to me. But when I looked, no one was there." We laughed, but something about her voice made me uneasy. We finished our dinner and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Around midnight, I woke up to a soft sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, faint, distant. Riley ... come ... I froze. My name. I felt my heart skipped. The voice sounded like Emma, but wrong. It was distant, cold. I sat up, my mind racing. Was someone playing a prank? I unzipped the tent, peering out into the darkness. The forest was still. No one was there. I zipped the tent back up, trying to ignore the whispers, but they grew louder. Riley ... come ... follow. The voice was unmistakable now. It wasn't Emma. It was something else. Something older. My breath quickened. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. The others would think I was overreacting. I stayed awake all night. The whispers never stopping, never fading. It wasn't until morning that I finally told the others, but none of them had heard anything. They laughed it off. "Just your imagination," they said. That afternoon, we decided to hike through the woods. The deeper we went, the darker the trees became. The air grew thicker, heavier. Then we reached a clearing, and there it was. Twisted, blackened tree, its branches gnarled like skeletal hands. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I approached. Then I heard the whispers again. Louder now, like they were all around us. "Riley ... come ... come to us." I turned, and the others looked as terrified as I felt. They had heard it too. Without another word, we bolted from the clearing, running through the trees, the whispers trailing us. We didn't stop until we reached the campsite, breathless and terrified. We packed up quickly, barely speaking to each other. Whatever was in those woods, we didn't want to find out. That night, we left the forest. We never spoke of it again, but every now and then, when I'm alone, I hear it. The whispers. Calling my name.